and welcome. Today we are extremely pleased and deeply honored to have with us today a scholar whose work encompasses areas of study, in particular the intersection of Islamic thought and a relatively new field, astrobiology and astroculture, that's mostly unknown, I think, to the community of scholars and of the public who are interested, or at least focused on our subject, which is, as you all know, UAP. So part of perhaps what we can accomplish today is understanding how our speaker's work connects with our own emergent field of UAP studies, the science and scholarship, that is, which concentrates on unidentified, anomalous, or as I prefer, still aerial and undersea phenomena. As members of the Society for UAP Studies, we are committed to advancing the research on UAP through rigorous, evidence-based, interdisciplinary scholarship. Today, with our speaker's fascinating topic, we put the emphasis on that interdisciplinarity, which is directly relevant, in fact, to our speaker's own research, tackling as it does some of the deepest human implications of the cosmos, including especially the theological implications our cosmos might suggest to some. We welcome an academic whose work is essential then to our own mission. Professor Dr. Jörg Matthias Determann, author of Islam, Science Fiction and Extraterrestrial Life, doesn't just ask if we're alone, he explores what a question like that means through the lens of history, culture, and of course, faith. His research on the Islamic view of multiple worlds, the concept of the jinn, and the use of science fiction as a tool for social commentary, among other topics, offers a critical perspective on how a major world religion grapples with what we may call simply the unknown or the uncanny or the divine, demonstrating exactly why the humanities and social sciences are vital in ways to understanding our subject, which is the UAP enigma. UAP has both a personal experience and an object of cultural fascination have fairly consistently led to spiritual or religious speculations, even sparked religious movements, sometimes inducing splinter or alternative religious movements within existing religious traditions, Islam included. And if secular modernity has had any illusions that it is irreligious or even anti-religious, we might hazard the thesis that the speculations that UAP are evidence of the presence, possibly enduring for centuries, of advanced non-human intelligence have, in ways, led to its own kind of religiosity or spiritual awakening, making the UAP-NHI conjunction a site of spirituality, distinctly modern in character, where speculations on NHI or ET, advanced tech, and the wonders or terrors for humanity such realities might imply all converge and perhaps clash in interesting ways. Dr. Jörg Matthias Determann is a distinguished historian and professor of Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar, specializing in the ethical, social, and political dimensions of science and technology within the Arab world. A respected voice in the emerging field of astroculture and theology, Dr. Determann has dedicated significant research to understanding how religion and culture interact with the question of extraterrestrial life. He holds a doctorate from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, the University of London, of course, and is the author of several influential books, including Space Science in the Arab World, Astronauts, Observatories, and Nationalism in the Middle East. Most relevant to our discussion today, of course, is his seminal work, Islam, Science Fiction and Extraterrestrial Life. Of course, I have my copy. Can you see it? And his role as co-editor of a newer volume, which I also have, in front of me, on Islamic theology and extraterrestrial life, published in 2024 by I.B. Tauris, which is an imprint of Bloomsbury, a distinguished publisher. His scholarship rigorously examines historical astronomical contributions from the Arab world, unpacks theological concepts like the jinn as advanced non-human intelligences, and analyzes how science fiction serves as a social tool for discussing cosmic issues, all of which provide essential historical, social, and intellectual context for our society's work on UAP studies, most especially, of course, wherever we find that UAP NHI conjunction. Join me, please, in welcoming Dr. Jörg Matthias Determann. Professor Determann, please, if you will.
Thank you so much, Mike, for this very, very generous introduction. Big thanks to all of you for coming. Let me share my screen. So thank you. Today I will talk about UFOs and UAP in the Muslim world. Let me tell you a little bit more about my own background. Mike gave a very, very generous introduction, and I don't want to sort of repeat a lot of what he was saying, but I would like to just mention that I appreciate the interdisciplinary field that UAP studies represent, right, where people from all kinds of disciplines in the natural sciences and in the social sciences, in the arts, in theology, in engineering, and so on, can come together. My own background, as Mike mentioned, is more in the history of science and in the history of science fiction. So here are two pictures of me, one at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. That was during a visit. That was part of the workshop, the History of Astronomy workshop, the biannual one that is organized by the University of Notre Dame in Indiana every 2 years. And the other picture is me and my daughter, Maria, who is now 6 years old. In the picture, I think she's 5, in Doha with stormtroopers from Star Wars. So I'm looking at UAP through the lens of a historian and through the lens of somebody who's interested in science fiction, cultural studies in particular, and like Mike said, also like through the lens of religious studies, Islamic studies, Middle Eastern studies. So I have the word UFOs in the title, and so maybe I want to start with just some words about terminology. I know this is the Society for UAP Studies. However, in my research on the history of imaginations of extraterrestrial life in the Muslim world, I haven't found the word UAP as such very much. At least in the Muslim world, I've found UAP a more recent term. So if I look at most of the 20th century, I find other terms. There is the term of UFO, unidentified flying object, which exists in English, but it has also been borrowed into other languages, such as Turkish. So here you can see publications from the 1970s on the topics of UFO, as well as on the topic of ufology. So this study of UFO, ufology here being made a Turkish word, ufology. Words for this phenomena exist sort of in all, probably most languages of the world and in most major languages of the Muslim world. And often the language is, often in the case of languages of the Muslim world, we find some kind of translation, not so much of UFO, but of flying saucers. So there's the Arabic word al-atbaq at-ta'ira, the flying saucer, or Urdu one, uran tashtari. So that's at least for the 20th century and maybe the early 21st century, the predominant terms that people engaging with this phenomenon have been using. So UFO, flying saucers in particular, but not so much UAP. So I therefore will not be sort of speaking very much about UAP or not using that particular term but when referring to historical examples in the course of my presentation. Sightings of UAP, of UFOs, of flying saucers, of anomalous phenomenon have taken place around the world from the 1940s, 1950s onwards. So when UFOs became really a global phenomenon. And there are many examples, often newspaper articles in languages of the Muslim world, so Arabic, Persian, but even in English. So this is, for instance, an article from 1978 about Kuwait, where a huge UFO makes a silent landing, and this is published in a South African newspaper. And here I would like to make a point that I will probably keep coming back to, is that UFO scholars, UFO reporters, UFO experiencers have been part of like a global community, a global network, where they've been sharing information with people really across national boundaries, across regional boundaries, and across also like boundaries of faith. So here, a South African newspaper reporting about a UFO landing in Kuwait during the 1970s. An entire UFO flap in Turkey. This is being reported in the Flying Saucer Review, sort of a very well-connected publication. So where we have dates, times, brief information being listed. We also have pictures of UFOs, photographs from at least sort of the 1970s. Not very clear pictures. So this is a picture from Dubai, from the UAE, from the United Arab Emirates from the 1970s. As you can see, there isn't actually very much that we can identify in this UFO. Here are photographs from Iran from 1988. Politically, this was during the time of the Iran-Iraq war, that just at the end of it, so that long war that lasted from 1980 until 1988, at which point the situation in both countries was very, very dire. But the Iran-Iraq war was a war that exhausted both countries, that also isolated both countries, especially Iran. And Iran has sort of struggled to come out of that isolation ever since. Nonetheless, UFO researchers in Iran have not been completely isolated from people interested in UFO elsewhere. So this is, again, an article in the Flying Saucer Report, which was produced in the UK, but which had a large international sort of correspondence network here. But these individual sightings of UAP in the Muslim world have been investigated in and published and examined in various books in different languages. So an example from Saudi Arabia, for instance, from 1980 is called Al-Atbaq Al-Ta'ira, the flying saucer, Haqiqa am Khayal, Truth or Imagination, by Muhammad Abdul Yamani, like a very, very prominent writer. There's also a Turkish UFO report, Türkiye UFO Raporu, from 1985, collecting this information. And it's not just people from Muslim majority countries have been interested in like collecting the various sightings, writing reports, writing volumes that brings all this information together, but even people from Europe. So here are some examples, one by a French author, Gérard Lebas, L'histoire des ovnis au Maroc, so history of UFO in Morocco, or altri UFO, avvistamenti extraterrestri nei paesi islamici e nelle antiche tradizioni religiose, so UFOs in the Islamic countries and in ancient religious traditions, by an Italian author. And we have these books, but we also have UFOs entering many other media, including, of course, films. This is an example from the 1950s here that I want to show a trailer. Uçan Daireler Istanbul'da, so flying saucers over Istanbul, where movie from the 1950s in black and white, but where you can see how Turkish cinema was in many ways connected to Hollywood and to global cinema more generally. So already there in the 1950s, you have the icon of the flying saucer, but you also have some Oriental elements. So there's belly dancing, Oriental dance, but there's also like the trope of the Catwoman from Mars, so sexy Martian alien women wearing blaster guns, so something that you would find a lot of UFO flying saucer movies from America and other countries. I'll just be playing the trailer here. Very old Turkish and Middle Eastern art form. You can see here this is a comedy. There's a photographer here with a huge camera here. So it's kind of exaggerated. Here's the flying saucer. And sort of a very boxy robot, perhaps made of cardboard. And there you can see these the aliens, again sort of similar to like Catwomen from Mars, wielding a ray gun here. And there you can see perhaps this Middle Eastern art form of the Oriental dance, belly dancing, Raqsa Sharqi, being taking the form of an alien dance here. The movie is in original Turkish, but you can see that sort of the visual language of this Turkish science fiction work is fairly universal, but very global recognizable to audience elsewhere at the time, as well as to audiences today. So this is from 1955, one of the first appearances of flying saucers. By the way, the dancer, he or she is on the spaceship, on the alien spaceship, if you were wondering. And UFOs, flying saucers, have never left Middle Eastern cinemas since. So this is a more recent trailer. This is Aerials, a movie that was made in
Studying
Dubai.
us from afar, extraterrestrials may have viewed changes in the Earth's atmosphere as a symptom.
ظهور مخلوقات ضخمة تنتشر في السماء وفي كل أرجاء العالم.
While we have reports suggesting our extraterrestrial visitors might be responsible for causing some kind of a block in communications,
whether these people are really speaking to extraterrestrials or being abducted by them is a matter of debate.
مركباتهم الفضائية تارس العالم كلها، وين ما يصير في هالدنيا مركباتهم متروسة، وحتى لو قدرت تسير كيف بسير؟ سياراتك ما تمشي، طيارات ما تطير، شفت؟
أقول لك شيء، تخيل لو إنه كانوا يعرفوا في مصادر طبيعية ولا ثروات ولا حديد ولا بترول بهيروشيما وناغازاكي كان ضربوها بالنووي؟ دول جايين من مجرات بعيدة يا أخي، لسبب واحد بس، ثرواتنا.
These things, they might have come from a different galaxy, but they're not intergalactic, they're interdimensional.
لأن يشكل عندهم أجسام مثل أجسامنا، وحتى لو عندهم أجسام مثل أجسامنا مادية ونزلوا أكيد بيستخدمون التقنية اللي عندهم من أجسامهم ما فيه، بيبينون مثل الظل في الظلام، like a shadow in the dark.
So this is Aerials, a science fiction movie from Dubai. I should mention here that Dubai and the United Arab Emirates have been locations for filming science fiction movies involving extraterrestrials for quite some time. Dubai has long sort of tried to brand itself as a city of the future. There's even a museum of the future in Dubai. And as part of that branding, there has been a lot of support for filmmakers to make science fiction movies. So a Star Trek movie, for instance, has been shot in Dubai, where the city then serves as the starbase Yorktown. Star Wars was also like shot in like the desert of Abu Dhabi and so on. This particular movie, Aerials, however, is a more local production and maybe not with quite as spectacular and expensive special effects as Star Wars or Star Trek have. So I mentioned Dubai as the city of the future. So there's a lot of futuristic architecture in the Muslim world, in Muslim majority countries, but also sort of in mosques used by Muslims sort of outside of Muslim majority countries. And some of that futuristic architecture also has UFO sort of themes. So this is an article from like over 40 years ago. Flying saucer domes, rocket minarets, mosques in North America reflect the confusion of the first generations of expatriate Muslims. The article here sort of writes about the confusion, but you can also make an argument sort of for the creativity, right? Sort of how the first Muslim immigrants try to sort of integrate into American mainstream culture, and also try to sort of establish all kinds of all kinds of mosques, but with new kinds of architectural styles. So flying saucer domes, this is a picture of a mosque in Miami, Florida, where it says here, the sphere, a marine pressure vessel taken from a junkyard, was removed by police order. So Mike mentioned that he was in Riyadh recently. I'm not sure, Mike, did you see this particular building? This is the Ministry of Interior.
Yeah, sorry, yes, I did.
Exactly. So a very, very powerful ministry that sort of controls police and internal security services. And I think the building is sort of very much recognizable as sort of as space age architecture, very similar to a flying saucer or to a UFO, which have also given nicknames to this building. But this is an art space in Sharjah. So if any of you go to the United Arab Emirates, Sharjah is a very, very flourishing cultural city, sort of right next to Dubai. And this particular building, again, sort of flying saucer shaped, UFO shaped, serves as an art space. So there are a lot of buildings like that, throughout the Muslim world. So we can really see that culturally, UAP have influenced media, books, films, but also the built urban environment. And this would not be possible without both governments and civil society taking UAP serious, being interested in the topic. And there are many, many examples of, for instance, high-level government officials having an interest in the topic. So this is from UFO Newsfront from 1976, news item here in the middle. UFO interest in Indonesia. The Indonesian Foreign Minister, Adam Malik, has invited Dr. J. Allen Hynek to lecture on UFOs and astronomy at the university in Jakarta and at the observatory in Lembang in December, so 1976. J. Allen Hynek, of course, very famous UFO researcher based at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, near Chicago. There have also been other government officials in other countries very, very interested in UFOs. Sometimes we only find out later about their interest. So for instance, there's a WikiLeaks story about a Moroccan UFO where there was a sighting by many people over Morocco, but that was taken seriously enough by the Moroccan government to contact the U.S. government, sort of, and ask the U.S. sort of whether the U.S. had any information about sort of this phenomenon, like a stream of light over in the atmosphere over Morocco. At the time, Henry Kissinger denied sort of that, that sort of any American planes or satellites or rockets had been involved. It turned out that this was most probably a Soviet booster rocket that burned out in the atmosphere over Morocco. This here is an example, here an article from the 1980s with Hafez al-Assad. Hafez al-Assad, he was the father of Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, who was ousted about a year ago. He's interviewed here by Time, and interestingly, here it says, Hafez al-Assad said, at one point discussing Soviet-US relations, Assad suggested that only an extraterrestrial power could make peace between the superpowers during the Cold War. He then went on unexpectedly to speak of his long-standing interest in UFOs, or unidentified flying object, which he takes quite seriously. Excerpts from the interview. And sort of he is asked here, suppose, as we discussed earlier, there were an extraterrestrial power and it tried to solve the Middle East's problems, what would you want it to do? And Assad, the president of Syria at the time, said, certainly it would be a big power and we would expect it to be unbiased. And Time magazine asked, would it make Israel disappear or shrink? And Assad said, it would neither enlarge nor reduce Israel. It should offer advice to both sides, not deal with guns, planes, or billions of dollars. Or if it does, it should do so even-handedly. Why should the American taxpayer pay billions to Israel and not pay similar amounts to the Arabs? Why should he like some people and dislike others? Here, Hafez al-Assad, the president of Syria, sort of imagining that extraterrestrials could be some kind of peace broker in the Arab-Israeli conflict during the 1980s. So I mentioned people at the highest levels being interested in UFOs, so a foreign minister from Indonesia or a president of Syria and so on. However, there has also been like a great interest in UFOs more at the grassroots level. So there are various civil societies, organizations in Indonesia, the Indonesia UFO Network, the Indonesia Space Science Society that organized an annual Indonesia UFO Festival. So a festival for space science, SETI, UFO, UAP. So here you can see the term UAP, but used in sort of more recent works. This is from 2022. And if any of you are interested, these organizations, they have a social media presence, so you can find them on Instagram, you can find them on Facebook, and but they also, as you can see, sort of write and communicate in English as well. So for those of you who don't speak Malay or Indonesian, you can contact them conveniently. This is another poster from 2023 of the Indonesia UFO Festival, this annual event. Mike also mentioned at the beginning in the introduction, what would it then mean, for instance, if we make contact with actual extraterrestrials? What could it mean for faith communities around the world? What could it mean for Muslims? That's something that I'm interested in, that a lot of people are interested in, including people here in our audience. We have quite a few studies now on extraterrestrials, and the Christian imagination, so Christian theology and aliens. When I sort of started being interested in this topic, there wasn't a lot of writing on Islam and extraterrestrial life in the English language academic literature. We had sort of chapters here and there, but not much more. But here, two examples of works that you probably know. David Weintraub's Religions and Extraterrestrial Life, How Will We Deal with It? That has a chapter on Islam. And then, of course, Ted Peters' Astrotheology book that also has a chapter on Islam. But given that there are somewhere around 2 billion Muslims in the world today, and given that Islam, of course, has an intellectual tradition that reaches back almost a millennium and a half, right? There is probably a lot more that one could study. So even my own investigations probably just barely sort of scratched the surface of what could be investigated. So what we find when we sort of look at Islamic theology more closely, for instance, readings of the Quran. This is an official English translation of the Quran by the King Fahd Holy Quran Printing Complex in Medina. This is a work from the 1980s, and where you have the Quran in Arabic, but also in the English translation. And here we can find the word worlds in the plural, where it says here, "Praise be to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the worlds," worlds in the plural. And here in footnote 20, it says the Arabic word Rabb, usually translated Lord, has also the meaning of cherishing, sustaining, bringing to maturity. Allah cares for all the worlds he has created. So this is an official Saudi edition. Being very, very comfortable with the idea of the plurality of worlds, that there's more than one world out there. Another verse here of the Quran is translated as, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the living creatures that he has scattered through them, and he has power to gather them together when he wills." In the footnote of this edition, footnote 4569, it says, "Life is not confined to our one little planet. It is a very old speculation to imagine some life like human life on the planet Mars. Though no scientific demonstration is possible, it is reasonable to suppose that life in some form or other is scattered through some of the millions of heavenly bodies scattered through space. What a wonderful sign of Allah. The Almighty, who created such countless beings, has surely the power to bring them together." So here, the idea of alien life existing as not being seen as blasphemous at all. On the contrary, the existence of diverse forms of life could be seen as sort of proof for the existence of an almighty creator. Now, Saudi Arabia, modern Saudi Arabia, has been dominated by a particularly literalist interpretation school of Islam. It's known as the Wahhabi tradition, which sort of is part of a broader Hanbali tradition of Sunni Islam. However, there are traditions that are sort of very distant from Saudi Wahhabi Islam that also come to very similar conclusion when it comes to extraterrestrial life. One of these traditions is the tradition of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is so far removed from mainstream Sunni Islam that they are sometimes not considered Muslims. For instance, by the Pakistani authorities, the Ahmadiyya is not considered a legitimate Muslim tradition. One of their leaders in recent history, Mirza Tahir Ahmad, he wrote a book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth, that has an entire chapter on the Quran and extraterrestrial life. And here there's a verse being quoted: Allah is he who created 7 heavens and of the earth the like thereof. So the idea that there are 7 earths around there. In other words, the Quran would support the idea of other earths being there, and terrestrial planets at the very least. And here also a verse is translated, and among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and of whatever living creatures Daba here spread forth in both. And later on in this interpretation by the leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community at the time, it says, the second part of the same verse speaks not only of the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but it categorically declares that it does exist, a claim which even the most modern scientific researchers have not been able to make so far with any measure of certainty. Yet this, and so on. So here, extraterrestrial life is being read by various scholars on a whole spectrum of the Muslim faith into the Quran, so the main scripture for all Muslims. Now, what other sort of interpretations do we find? So a frequent interpretation has been the idea that the jinn, the jinnis, might be extraterrestrial. This was already noted in the Flying Saucer Review in the mid-1980s, which reports about a Sufi sheikh of the Naqshband order of dervishes, who was asked after speaking in who was asked about the topic, and he made a connection here between the jinn and the UFO. Again, this Sufi shaykh might be somebody from a very different tradition, from both the Ahmadiyya Muslim community as well as from the dominant Saudi Wahhabi establishment. We have one particular journalist, UFOs in the Quran, who wrote an entire book about that topic, also noting the similarities between reports of UFOs and reports of encounters with jinn, including encounters with jinn in the Quran. So the jinn are typically understood as very powerful, just like aliens are often imagined to be very, very powerful. Jinn are known to engage in trickery, to trick the senses. There are stories of abduction by jinn. There are stories of humans being burned by the jinn, and Abdulaziz Khan feels that these stories of encounters with jinn in the Islamic religious tradition and the Islamic scripture and intellectual literary tradition map on very well on the phenomenon of UFOs, UFO abductions, experiments by aliens on abductees, and so on. Abdulaziz Khan, he's not a theologian per se, but he is also an influential journalist. Now, at the time of writing his book, he was based in Arlington, Virginia, and he worked for the Voice of America's South Asia division, and so on. And again, sort of a very different kind of Muslim from, let's say, a Sufi sheikh or an Ahmadiyya leader. And a similar sort of connection between jinn, demons, demonic creatures, and UFOs was made, again, by a very different kind of person, Asim Omar. He was head of Al-Qaeda, terrorist organization for South Asia, and he wrote a book about the Bermuda Triangle, UFOs, and the Antichrist, essentially like promoting conspiracy theories that involve the United States, that involve UFOs, that involve the Antichrist. So somebody with a very, very different outlook from Abdulaziz Khan as a Voice of America journalist based in Arlington, Virginia. Asim Omar was killed by sort of American and Afghan forces in 2019. So in many ways, Asim Omar was on the other side from Abdulaziz Khan, but yet sort of this association between jinn and demons was somebody that fascinated both people. Asim Omar, Abdulaziz Khan, these are both Muslims. However, that connection between the jinn and UFOs has also been something that has fascinated other people. So we can see these connections with jinn, also like spanning different faith communities and sort of going outside the confines of the Muslim world as such. Gordon Crater, the editor of the Flying Saucer Review, he was sort of fascinated by this idea, sort of could UFOs be jinn? So Gordon Crater, not being sort of somebody from coming out of like the Muslim tradition, but sort of he felt sufficiently intrigued by possible connections between jinn and UFOs that he wrote about it. And there are other scholars as well and writers. One of them is Rosemary Ellen Guiley, somebody that many of you are probably familiar with, who has written many, many books about various kinds of anomalous phenomena. And she also sort of got interested in sort of the jinn here, sort of publishing at least 2 books on that topic, on the jinn connection. Here the subtitle says, The Hidden Links Between Jinn, Shadow People, ETs, Nephilims, Archons, Reptilians, and other entities. I should mention here that in the Islamic traditions, the jinn are understood to be intelligent life, but they are a form of life that is of a different nature than ours. They have also been interpreted perhaps to be coming from another dimension, so coming from another world in some ways, but being able to enter our world. So in that sense, they are extraterrestrials as well. Jinn are understood to be rational creatures, sentient creatures, creatures that could choose between good and evil. Jinn are creatures that will be judged at the end of time. So while there are many, many different sort of interpretations of the jinn do have a very important place in Islamic scripture. There's an entire chapter of the Quran named after the jinn. and by many authors, they are identified as sort of a form of extraterrestrial intelligence. We have a lot of people who wrote books about UFOs, sort of making connections between Islam and UFOs. But there are other people who went further than just writing books, but they sort of founded entire movements that draw on both UFO mythology as well as on Islamic traditions. One of those Islamic UFO religions is the Nation of Islam, African-American spiritual tradition that has the idea of a mother plane or a mothership, flying saucer-like vessel that would bring salvation for African-American Muslims. Some critics of the Nation of Islam would have again sort of accused the Nation of Islam here of going too far or being confused, but you can also recognize the great creativity involved in bringing space age mythology together with Islamic traditions. A competitor movement to the Nation of Islam has been the Nawabian nation, or the Nawabian movement, led by a man named Dwight York, or Malachi Z. York, somebody who actually changed his name multiple times, but what he sort of also did was trying to bring alien sort of mythology together with Islamic thought. So he has a book about the man from planet Rizq, Rizq being a term from the Quran, where he describes himself as a being from a 19th galaxy called Iliyun, and so on. And again, he comes up with a theological account that in many ways could sound like confusing, but it can also just sound very, very creative and original. Syncretic form of bringing different traditions together, mixing them and creating something new. Sort of bringing in here Arabic terms, bringing Hebrew terms, mixing the Bible, mixing the Quran, in order to establish a new religious movement in which extraterrestrials and Islam play a role. There's also a Turkish new religious movement called the World Brotherhood Union Mevlana Supreme Foundation. The word Mevlana here refers to Maulana, an honorific title for the poet Rumi, who is also a Sufi sheikh and venerated as such in Turkey. The World Brotherhood Union Mevlana Supreme Foundation sort of mixes extraterrestrial ideas about the influence of the star Sirius on Earth in particular, mixes that with Sufi thinking. This movement, it came out of Turkey, but missionaries have also gone into Russia, have also gone into other places, and their principal scripture, the Knowledge Book, also exists in English for you to look up. I want to sort of come to an end now, but I just want to maybe stress that aliens, UFOs, UAPs have invaded the Muslim world at all kinds of different levels and in all kinds of different media. They have invaded movies, they've invaded books, but they've invaded interpretations of the Quran. And they've also invaded architecture and modern art. There is a thriving and growing movement of Islamic futurisms. So I have futurisms here, the plural, because I would say there isn't just one Muslim futurism. There's perhaps an Arab futurism, but there's a South Asian futurism, there's a Gulf futurism, and sort of various kinds of sub currents reflecting the diversity of the Muslim world. Here are some examples. Munira Al-Qadiri, she's a Kuwaiti artist about alien technology, using the aliens as a metaphor to speak, for instance, about the petroleum industry. Here you can see a head for like drilling for oil being turned into an artwork. This is an art installation about an American diner. I feel they will take me away from here. It says, Munira Al-Qadiri, this Kuwaiti artist here, reflecting about globalization, reflecting about sort of alienation, reflecting about sort of cultural imperialism and so on, and the various ways that Kuwait is connected with the West and with the rest of the world. Munir Al-Qadri reflects about this through the metaphors, through the language, through the visual culture of UFOs. Here are some digital collages that have also made it into one of my recent books. This is called Damascus Under Siege, artworks that were made during and about the Syrian civil war that came to an end last year, where the artist combined images of Damascus, old photographs, with artwork about UFOs, flying saucers, that the author Ayham Jabr, Damascus-based artist, found on the internet. To conclude here, sort of we can find aliens, extraterrestrials, UAP almost everywhere we look, in all kinds of media, in religious texts, and we can see them being part of like a really vibrant art scene, being part of a very vibrant theological scene as well, where there are lots and lots of different discussions going on, where different futures are being created and imagined. And what I also would like to stress here is that these Islamic engagements with extraterrestrials, with aliens, have been in like constant contact with the rest of the world. So at no point was sort of the Islamic imagination of UFOs isolated from Hollywood or isolated from UFO or UAP researchers elsewhere. There have been connections even in countries like Iran that have been sanctioned by Western countries. There have still been contacts between UAP researchers in Iran and UAP researchers in the US or the UK, just showing how strong these links are. And yeah, I feel now that we have this society, the Society for UAP Studies, I'm very, very excited about further connections and further links that are being made between people interested in UAP around the world. So let me thank all of you for listening. Let me thank Mike, Adam, Zach, and others for connecting all of us, and hopefully forging future connections between the Muslim world and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Fascinating, utterly fascinating discussion. I have to apologize. I had some technical difficulties. I had to switch computers in the beginning of your talk, so I had to leave, and now the camera doesn't work on the new device, so you can only hear me, I hope.
No problem at all. I can hear you very well, and I'm
Great.
sorry that you had these difficulties.
Yeah, it's a long story. So yeah, I mean, this it's such a rich presentation, and there are a number of different themes that are in play. So just to sort of initiate the discussion, I wanted to return to the beginning, and maybe just sort of get your thoughts on the introduction of the term UFO into Arabic, and as you were discussing that, because that is the historical term that many of us are familiar with, that refers to this sort of empirical phenomenon, which is now called unidentified, either anomalous or aerial / undersea phenomena, right? So I had a question. As the Arabic world reaches for this term UFO, can you discuss that? I mean, that moment where it is brought in, or might we even say appropriated into Arabic? Is there an interesting sort of cultural, linguistic, historical, social phenomenon in play as that term is reached for in the Arabic world, right, to describe empirical, right, sightings of something on the one hand, and then perhaps either at that same time or maybe later starts to kind of, become the UFO phenomenon as we understand it, that is associated with NHI, ET, et cetera, right? So can you sort of comment on that, the emergence of that term and the use of it in the Arabic world, and in particular the language, right?
Thank you so much. So we have two terms essentially that were dominant, as far as I could tell, during the Cold War at least. One is UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. The other word was flying saucer. And sort of my understanding historically is that UFO was the preferred term sort of used by the United States Air Force initially. Now, the United States Air Force was an organization that had a lot of links with different Middle Eastern countries and Islamic countries. So, for instance, Turkey, having been a long-standing NATO country, right? So meant that you had American Air Force planes, Air Force soldiers, pilots being stationed there. Turkey was also like a border country, right, to the Eastern Bloc, right? So the Soviet Union and the Soviet-controlled Caucasus being a neighboring area to this to Turkey. So you had a lot of like observations in for instance, Turkish airspace or close to Turkish airspace of things maybe that the United States Air Force was interested in, right? So possible Soviet aircraft entering Turkish airspace and so on. So there would have been a great interest in that. But the United States Air Force has also been very, very important in protecting the Gulf countries. So Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar, United Arab Emirates and so on. And America became the dominant protecting power as the British withdrew as sort of the former colonial power during the 1960s, 1970s. So the British moved out, the Americans moved in. So you had these sensitive oil installations in particular that the local Arab rulers wanted to protect, but thereby also the Americans wanted to protect. And here in this over the Gulf states, you didn't have so much the threat of like Soviet aircraft, perhaps, as you had over Turkey, but you had other conflicts. There was the Iran-Iraq war with missiles, with airplanes going one way or the other. So you had a lot of people being interested in, looking at what's happening in the sky there. So probably the UFO term would have entered like the lexicon of like local like Arab Air Force officers who collaborated with US Air Force officers that way. Now the other term, that's the term of the flying saucer. And that would have been the preferred term probably for Hollywood. And sort of the entertainment industry for broadly. While you had Middle Eastern Muslim officials dealing with the US government directly and sort of importing perhaps the term UFOs that way, you also had Muslim publics importing American Hollywood entertainment products, movies, books, later video games as well, and thereby sort of getting more the term flying saucer here. And I think they've in the Arabic, the word UFO did not actually catch on that much. Maybe because yes, you could sort of transliterate it as just UFO, but in some ways, the word, just translating the word flying saucer into Arabic, atbaq ta'ira, so like as a flying dish, was a lot more convenient. So in the literature, then you have a lot more people in the Arab world than using the word flying saucer over the term UFO, which was maybe the preferred Air Force term.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
So if I just, before we move to the audience, just to kind of continue it. So you have sort of two, you have two terms and they have different sort of social linguistic histories, right? So
That's
you've
right.
got, so you've got the UFO term, and that it sounds like this is going to be more relevant for looking at a military sort of context, right? And so is it right to say that from that side, it was more originating with respect to Turkey? So we're talking, of course, not the Arab world there, but it's the sort of the Islamic world. The first entry point is perhaps through, is this correct, through military NATO, in Turkish military relations with Western powers. Is it kind of the origin of the term when it first is employed?
I think that's what I would say. Turkey, right? Almost from the beginning of the Cold War, right? Sort of from sort of the late 1940s, early 1950s, was sort of like a border country, right, between the East and West, and sort of was right at the border between sort of the Western American-led capitalist world and sort of the Eastern Soviet-led socialist communist world, and sort of like in the 1950s, right, sort of you had this massive collaboration between the United States and Turkey on many different levels, military level, but also then cultural level at the same time. So you had American Air Force officers, the American military in general, sort of being stationed in Turkey, watching the skies, and so on, and probably bringing interest in UFOs with them already during the 1950s. Whereas in the Arab world, right, with countries like Saudi Arabia, so in the 1950s or so, they were not yet like at these frontier zones of these sort of global conflicts. So I think in the Gulf country, right, you had a lot more interest in like military development, especially during the 1970s and 1980s with the Iran-Iraq war. So yes, I would say first entry of sort of UFOs in Middle Eastern Muslim countries, I would say in particular through Turkey.
Yeah, I see. And then you have the other side, which is the term flying saucer, which is wrapped up in the entertainment industry and so on. And so from that side, where do you first see that? Is that in the 1950s? That's as the term begins to become popular, from out of the United States, right? Famously, right? We kind of know the origin of the term from the Arnold sighting, and then this kind of flashes around the world. So there's a story to tell about the emergence of that term in Arabic then, but is it more coming from an entertainment industry context? Is that what you're saying?
I would say so, especially movies. And again, maybe Turkey was first, perhaps, although like flying saucer movies, right? They became so quickly globalized.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of within just the space of a few years, right? Sort of you had initially sort of American-produced UFO movies being exported sort of to like all corners of sort of the American-influenced world, at least. And then basically you then had local filmmakers, for instance, in Turkey, sort of making their own versions of it. So just like in America, right, where you had like one successful movie being copied by other movies, right, where you have like numerous B movies, like cheap movies being produced. We see something very, very similar in the movie industries, for instance, of Istanbul, like these, let's say the Turkish industry, film industry, it may not have had the same budget for like special effects as Hollywood, but like these sort of boxy robots, right? The kind of movie that we saw, right, where you have some belly dancing, sort of aliens in like tight-fitting, sexy costumes, and so on, right? Something you can sort of put on with a relatively low budget, right? You don't need industrial light and magic. You don't need to have LucasArts here for those kinds of special effects.
Great. Of course, I have many, many more questions after this sort of preliminary discussion about these terms and their historical origins. But let's turn to the audience. So, Raphael.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Professor. It was a very, very nice lecture. This topic kind of, entices my curiosity. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, so when I look at the Islam world from the outside, I see their faith as very well defined, a defined structure, very strict. Even if we compare with the other Semitic religions like Christians and Judaism, it looks like they're even more strict with that. So everything in the universe, in that view, has a place in the purpose on God's will. So that's how I see it. Correct me if I'm wrong, okay? But that's how I see the Islam, the Muslim world. So that's why I find it hard to see how the modern idea of UAP, UFO, like objects with intelligence and technology made, some perhaps, and beyond any explanation, how this could fit easily within that framework, that religious framework they have. So UAP or UFOs, they don't see divine. I think that's the correct word. They don't see divine. So so I'm curious, how do the Muslims reconcile the UAP reports and their Islamic teachings about these unseen things? So can this belief in these phenomena, these modern phenomena, coexist alongside with their faith, or does it force it to maybe rethink or maybe risk seen as a competing with the authority of the divine of the Islam revelation? Is the question clear?
Thank you so much. Great question. So first of all, right, you mentioned Islam being in some ways quite confined or so. Now, Islam in general, right, it isn't one closed organization, right? But there is no equivalent to the Catholic Church, for instance, in Islam, right? You don't have a single head. So you've got various different traditions and schools and sects, right? You've got broadly a division into Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. And then maybe as a third category, you might have Sufis. But even among Sunnis, right, there are different schools, and one of which might be the Hanbali school. Within the Hanbali school, you might have a sub-school, for instance, the Wahhabi school in Saudi Arabia. Within the Shia school, right, you might have the Ismailiyya, which is headed by the Aga Khan, important religious and cultural leader. You have the Twelver Shia, who are dominant in Iran. So you've got various different groups. So there is no single hierarchy. There isn't a single head. So if the aliens come and talk to Muslims and say, please take us to your leader, right, there is no single Muslim leader who could speak for all Muslims. Nothing like, for instance, a Pope could perhaps try to speak for all Catholics. So you have a great diversity of various different traditions. At the center, of course, there is the scripture of the Quran, which can be interpreted in different ways. And one of the basic ideas of the Quran is that God is all-powerful, that God can create whatever he wants to create, and thereby, right, he can create as many worlds as he wants to create, and he can create as many creatures that he wants to create. And there is this strong idea that all the worlds that exist and all the different creatures that we have throughout the cosmos, they might be evidence for the omnipotence of God. Therefore, aliens not being not really contradicting the idea of not really contradicting a central element of the Islamic faith. Is a difference to Christianity as well, right? Christianity has not just the central figure of God, but but also the central figure of Jesus Christ, of course. And in Islam, there is no real equivalent person to Jesus Christ. In most mainstream Islamic movements, there is no one human figure who is both human and God, or the Son of God, or the Father of God, or anything like that. For instance, what you have as a potential issue that is sometimes cited in Christianity is, God became incarnate sort of as Jesus Christ on this particular planet. Does that mean that sort of Christianity is then sort of somehow sort of special to Earth where Jesus Christ lived, or is like Jesus Christ and sort of his life, and is this like, to what extent is this sort of universal relevance? In Islam, sort of, you have the figure of the Prophet Muhammad, but he is sort of he's not a god, he's not the son of God, he is not. He's only one of many prophets. So in Islam, perhaps it is more easily thinkable that, well, if there are other planets, maybe they have their own prophets, for instance. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, he answers. Actually, it's quite the opposite of what I would think, because I would think that Christians and Judaism were more like open to the possibility, but actually it's quite the opposite, right? It seems the Muslims are more open to this possibility, because my background's more in Christian traditions, so the Christians, not say most of them, but at least a big portion of them sees UFOs, some kind of like demons or something, right? So they have this view, not like a creature, a brother from another world created by God. But yeah, it answered my question.
Thank you.
So, Brian.
Hallo, Dr. Determann, vielen Dank für dieses Gespräch. Ich glaube, das Wort ist. Kannst du hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
So, what piqued my interest was the second movie trailer you played, where the one person said, "Oh, maybe they're here for our resources, our iron, our uranium, or so on." This is a very common trope in the ufological discourse. However, that trope has a certain resonance in the so-called Americas, where it often expresses a certain bad conscience. It will also have a certain resonance for Europeans, where it expresses a certain bad conscience. But for the Arabic world, which is very different, has a very different history and a very different relationship to colonialist exploitation, even if that line is picked out of a B movie, when it's placed in that new context, it must work a little differently. And I'm wondering if you might have some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, right, in science fiction, including science fiction movies, right, aliens are often associated with colonialism, right? And alien worlds are often associated with colonialism in some ways. So either it is us going to other planets and colonizing other planets, or it is the aliens coming to us and sort of invading our place and sort of replacing us. And like you said, right, in the American context, this might have a certain resonance, right, where you had a history of European settlers in particular, right, invading America and sort of appropriating resources, replacing sort of Native Americans. And sort of, but you're absolutely right, sort of in the Arab and Muslim world, there's perhaps a slightly different resonance as well. So yes, you have, like in Europe, right, so sort of a European imperialism. Although I would say like imperialism obviously is not just a European phenomenon, right? The Muslims were also like great empire builders, right? The Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, the Mughal Empire, and so on. And some of these empires are still regarded with sort of like highly, for instance, by political leaders like Recep Tayyip Erdogan, president of Turkey, and so on. However, there is also like the experience in many Arab and Muslim countries of having been colonized by sort of aliens, in some ways by foreigners. So the foreign ships having arrived, right? At some point, right, the British gunboats sort of entering your water, and then and I think this, absolutely, and this, especially like in the Gulf countries, right? There is this history of the British coming, and then the British in particular, and then the Americans staying in the Gulf and in the Arabian Peninsula for the natural resources, for the oil and gas in particular, and bringing sort of sophisticated alien sort of technology like this drilling equipment to extract those resources. You're right. So the resonances are different. Also, perhaps how, for instance, Dune is received in the Arab world. So, like in many ways, Frank Herbert's Dune is a metaphor for sort of Middle Eastern history as well, right? So you have the desert planet Dune, which actually has an Arabic name, Arrakis, which in Arabic means the dancer, named after an actual sort of star that is called Arrakis. So it's a desert planet with an Arabic name, with sort of an indigenous people, right, the Fremen, that have sort of Arab and Muslim and Middle Eastern inspired sort of culture and language and so on. And they're essentially subdued by a foreign empire led by an emperor. So that spice, so natural resources can be extracted from that desert, a resource that is essential for interstellar navigation, right? The spice being the fuel for the empire. So sort of you can read that very much as a spice as a metaphor for oil, right? Sort of oil being extracted in the Middle East, in the desert, and oil being the fuel essentially for the global empire. Many Arabs, they would read Dune exactly like that. They would see it, yes, this is about Arabs and Middle Easterners being subdued by the emperor, by an empire, and so it is interesting, but many Arabs and Muslims, they love these plots just as much. So maybe the resonances are different, but the movies are sort of just as popular, perhaps, as in America.
Excellent. Sehr gut. Vielen Dank.
Danke. Ja, sehr gerne. Thank you.
Professor Determann, or Matthias, sorry. Let's stay on that topic for a minute. Sort of science fiction and this imaginal realm as a kind of, in a way, it's a kind of protected realm where these literatures and these stories, kind of serve a kind of a social function to discuss issues like colonialism, and maybe even also the sort of the repressive forces operating within Middle Eastern society, censorship, etc. Could you take us there? How the science fictional is used as an arena within which to resist, in a sense, right, colonialism, and resist the repressive elements of its own society. For example, you mentioned the beautiful work of this collage artist who's working within the Syrian civil war. I have some friends in Germany who lived through that and who are there now actually in this transitional period. So can you bring us there? Can you go back to that and how the science fictional is used as an instrument of resistance and of critique and the effects of that and the power that might have in this context?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Another great question. Many Muslims around the world have faced various degrees of sort of oppression, repression, and so on, right? So you have dictatorships of various different stripes and kinds, like dominating different Muslim majority countries. So, for instance, Syria under the Ba'ath Party, under the Al-Assad dictatorship, both under Bashar al-Assad and his father, Hafez al-Assad, right? You've had the Ba'athist dictatorship in Iraq. You've had various kinds of regimes in Egypt, Libya, like Saudi Arabia, you name it, like of different kinds, right? Sort of some of these regimes allied with the West, some of those allied with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but sort of none of which have been democratic. And then even Muslims who've lived in democracies have also sort of faced a lot of repression. So for instance, how Muslims in the United States of America or in Germany or other European countries, right, have been policed, have been put under surveillance, right? How many Muslims have been seen as sort of suspects, being suspected of terrorism and so on, right? How Muslims in Europe, North America, and in sort of just democracies have been sort of profiled, racially profiled, ethnically profiled, religiously profiled, and so on. So yeah, sort of Muslims have experienced repression, censorship, and so on, really across the world. And science fiction has been a way for them, like, to sort of imagine a different world, right? And to like talk about important issues and sort of to criticize, right? So maybe if you're in Egypt under a dictatorship, and sort of you want to criticize your own government for corruption, it's very, very hard to do that sort of in the form of a published book. But if you sort of do it in the form of science fiction, right? And if you don't write about Egypt, if you don't write about the Egyptian government, but instead you write about Mars, and you imagine a corrupt government on Mars instead, you can sort of still level the same criticism. You can still make the same points, but you have sort of plausible deniability, right? You can say, well, my book, my novel, my theater play, my movie isn't really about Egypt at all. It's clearly about Mars, can't you see? Sort of you, and in many, many ways, artists would get away with that too. So science fiction has sort of been an area sort of that provides sort of freedom, sort of a creative outlet in that way. And I mean, maybe if, and maybe not just for Muslims, and maybe not just in the Muslim world, right? If we think about the United States of America at the moment, where we have very, very powerful corporations, right? Being extremely influential in the political process, right? How do you criticize extremely powerful corporations in America? Well, one way of doing so and without being sued by one or the other powerful corporation is probably sort of having a science fiction movie where you imagine an all-powerful corporation, right? So in other words, like, let's say, don't name existing corporations, but sort of imagine, don't name existing corporations here now that you would like to criticize, but imagine a future scientific world with other kinds of corporations that people would still resonate as being relevant. So yeah, I think there's a special possibility for science fiction to critique in a situation where you don't have much freedom.
Yeah, I mean, just continuing that, I mean, it seems like science fiction frequently functions like that, perhaps throughout its history, but especially, you know, more in contemporary world. I mean, you know, Star Trek itself, in a sense, is a critique, right, of the politics and the economics of scarcity, right, and then you have recent examples, Ready Player One, for example, you know, is a kind of a critique of an encroaching sort of corporate capitalist, you know, sort of dystopia, right? Exactly. So yeah. So it kind of functions. So science fiction functions as this imaginal realm in which you're able to dream, right, of these future possibilities. So you talked about futurisms. Let's go maybe back to that. And we know, you know, today I was in Saudi last year. I was at this real estate cityscape, I think they call it, if you've ever heard of that. It's this huge real estate convention right in the middle of the desert outside of Riyadh, about an hour's drive. And there I got to meet some of the officials, actually, some of the Saudi officials that were part of the NEOM, the city, this amazing, what is it, 100, how long is this, this line city, right, is something like 100 kilometers. And what struck me, having been there and seen this, was how much of it is about the future, and there is a kind of living futurism in play unfolding there. Can you comment on that? Can you bring us there? How do you see the sort of the imaginal realm, the dreams of the Saudis, for example, with this incredible architectural and engineering feat that they're attempting to accomplish in the Gulf? How do you see that kind of folded into the wider sort of literary imaginal, right, of these cultures? Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really, really great question. So I'm glad that you went to Saudi Arabia, right? In Saudi Arabia, you have a lot of like urban futurism, right? Futuristic architectural projects, like new cities being built. This is something that you can do when you don't have a democracy, right? When you're not sort of bound by like elections and legislative periods, right? So in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, right, you actually have national visions that are often projected like years and decades into the future, in a way that you don't find as much in like democracies that are bound by like 4-year or 2-year election cycles, right? You don't necessarily have a 50-year plan for Germany because the German politicians, they don't know whether they'll still be in power in 50 years time. Or in America, right? But NASA itself is trying to sort of plan missions that sort of are years in the future, but NASA doesn't really know its budget. 2 years from now on, because every 2 years the United States Congress that approves the budget might change, right, with elections and midterm elections and so on. Like in Saudi Arabia, leaders are sort of unconstrained by those electoral cycles. In Saudi Arabia also, like, geographically has the possibility, right, that you do have a lot of like sparsely populated land, a lot of desert, that is actually in proximity to water sources. So yes, it is desert, it's scarcely populated, but you either have underground groundwater sources, or you could have the proximity of either the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, from which you could desalinate water on massive scales, and the technologies for water desalination have increased massively. And so this, I guess, this combination of sort of scarcely populated land together with sort of accessible water, sort of has given rise to like future cities, including like future entertainment cities and technological cities, maybe not so different from actually the Southwestern United States, right? So when you think about Las Vegas, when you think about Southern California, so where you had maybe 150 years ago, scarce populations, but you did have sort of water sources, you did have groundwater or desalination that I guess also then enabled you to sort of build Los Angeles as a city of the future, that allowed you to build Disneyland in Anaheim as sort of a community of the future, that allowed you to build Las Vegas as sort of an entertainment city in the future. So you have sort of something similar going on here. So some of the technology like desalination is new. Some of the wishes like to establish new cities, that's not a new thing in Middle Eastern history. So almost for as long as we can go back in Middle Eastern history, you have powerful leaders trying to create their own cities. So think about Alexander the Great, who established Alexandria and sort of other cities named after him. So there is an idea of sort of a new ruler making his mark by establishing a new capital, a new city. There are various other like Egyptian rulers who sort of at various points founded new capitals and so on. So there's a new Middle Eastern tradition of that, but you do have the futuristic technologies that sort of enable this. I mentioned also like futurisms in the plural here because there is just like there's diversity in terms of Muslim faiths, Muslim communities. There's also like diversity of futuristic imaginations, right? So there is more of a top-down futurism where it's like the government makes a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan. So maybe similar to like socialist, communist 10-year plans, right, that had their own socialist utopianism. But there is also like a bottom-up futurism. We do also have grassroots level artists who are maybe trying to imagine different kinds of futures, and sometimes radical futures as well. So you do have, just like in Western countries too, you have left-wing radicals and right-wing radicals sort of having their own ideas of an ideal society, of a utopian idea. And some of those radicals might be peaceful, some of them are violent. So in some ways, even somebody like an Al-Qaeda leader, he probably had a radical idea of sort of creating a different kind of Islamic future. So you have futurisms at different levels.
Yes, and I lived in Cairo for 3 months, and my sense while being there, and having then went over to Saudi Arabia for a few weeks, actually, my sense was that the dreaming of the future was, it seemed to me it had landed in the Gulf, and in the Gulf it was where the energy was both being attracted and being generated in terms of these futurisms, right? Imagining new kinds of cities and new kinds of possibilities. But there's this other dimension that, as you were speaking, that it sort of occurred to me, which is that from what I have studied about Islam, it is, really, and you might say this about early Christianity as well, it is very communalist, right? I mean, a lot of these Semitic traditions really are rooted in a kind of communalism. And the history of Christianity is extremely complex, 2,000 years. And we sort of tend to forget the origins there in these kinds of communalist societies and philosophies that sort of persist as genetic elements even today. So what I wanted to ask you to kind of come to, and how this intersects with the imaginal in science fiction, which very frequently you'll find communalist kind of societies dreamed in science fiction, right? Again, Star Trek, comes to mind. But especially with these imagined futures from in the Islamic world, let's sort of talk about that communalist aspect and how that plays out, you think, today in these futurisms. What is this element of communalism that persists in Islamic society and thinking? For example, the Ummah we could talk about. This is a key social institution, right? Religious. Can you just comment on that?
Thank you. So by communalism, you mean the importance of community in particular?
Yeah. And governance and communal governance as well.
And communal governance. So I think you have a strong tendency in Islam, right, to emphasize, for instance, the equality of all Muslims in front of God. Similar perhaps to early Christianity, or sort of also certain branches of Christianity today, Protestant branches in particular, the idea that sort of, in some ways all believers are equal before God, that you don't have a religious hierarchy. As I mentioned, Islam doesn't really have any equivalent to the Catholic Church. There's no sort of hierarchy of priests and bishops and cardinals and the Pope, who in some ways sort of can mediate between the layperson and God. So in Islam, there's this strong idea that sort of everybody equally has a direct connection to God, and that God can sort of judge you in the end and sort of give you salvation, irrespective of sort of who your sheikh was, or irrespective of sort of your mosque attendance, and sort of your connection to religious hierarchy. So there is something that is sort of quite egalitarian at the basis of Islam. Even the official title of the Saudi king, right? If you ever meet the Saudi king, you don't say Your Majesty, so it's not His Majesty. Instead, it's custodian of the two holy mosques. That's the English version, but the Arabic version, Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, actually means more servant of the two holy mosques, being the mosques of Mecca and Medina. So that's the official title of the Saudi king. So he himself describes himself as a in Arabic here, khadim. Another word for servant or slave in Arabic is abd, which is a very, very frequent name, part of names. So you have Abdullah, meaning servant of God or slave of God. Abdurrahman, servant of the merciful. Abdul Karim, servant of the generous, and so being God. So there's a very strong current in Islam sort of that emphasizes that egalitarianism and also like our own sort of humility as humans in front of God. Does that mean there are no hierarchies in the Muslim world? Of course not. Right? Sort of Saudi Arabia is an incredibly hierarchical society. It is a kingdom after all, where you do have a king and you do have a royal family, and you have princes of different ranks, and so on. But there is maybe this this underlying sort of equality, the idea of all Muslims forming one community, which you, for instance, could see when you ever see pictures of the Hajj, the pilgrimage, or the Umrah, where you can see everybody, all the pilgrims wearing the same kind of clothes, right? These white outfits of pilgrims, where whether you're rich, whether you're poor, you are sort of all engaging in the same rituals, you're doing the same pilgrimage, and so on. And there is this very, very strong element that can then also be mobilized for utopian thought, right? So if Islam sort of has as its basis that, yes, maybe we are all equal in front of God, and that we're all sort of humble servants of God, that this is the core of our community, then maybe, yes, we can also in the future envision a utopia where this is actually possible, where we have a utopia maybe where there might be no kings anymore, and where there might be no queens anymore, and no hierarchies. So there, yes, you do also have futurism having a subversive potential, right? That would be sort of a bottom-up futurism, maybe a radical futurism that could be in contrast to the government planned futuristic city building.
Does science fiction in the Arab world intersect with, or the question is, how does Arab science fiction intersect with these more subversive movements, let's say? So for example, maybe we could even situate this discussion in the context of Arab socialism, for example. Do you find any interesting connections there between science fiction and the critique that you see emergent in that literature, and these more subversive elements that challenge the sort of theocracies and the monarchical structures of society that have typified Arab society?
Thank you. Well, in some ways, right, you can see science fiction as per se subversive, right? Science fiction per se offers you a different kind of world from the world that you have, right? So it can be sort of utopian, and it can be dystopian, but in some ways, science fiction always speculates about there being an alternative to the status quo. There being just the potential of a different world, better or worse, and and there are sort of various sort of socialist imaginations of this as well. That's one of some of the wonderful things, right, that science fiction offers you. It sort of offers you just possibilities, right? So one thing that has been very difficult to talk about in many Arab countries, but also in Western countries, is of course like the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? And we saw that interview with Hafid al-Assad speaking about extraterrestrials potentially, mediating between Arabs and Israelis, but maybe science fiction in general also offers us like ways to speak about Israel and Palestine, where you like maybe sort of maybe you can get sort of a way out of the current sort of impasse or hopelessness that a lot of people feel. And there are like a lot of Palestinian artists as well as Israeli artists, right, who were thinking about, okay, what could Israel and Palestine look like in 50 years' time or so? There is a book collection called Palestine Plus 100, which imagines Palestine in the future and sort of with utopianism and dystopianism. One of the imagination is, that there might just be two parallel dimensions, right? So the Palestinians and the Israelis, they are sort of on the same land, but just living in different dimensions. Or one other possibility would be that's more of a dystopian possibility, would be that like Palestinian land would be shrunk so much, would be so constrained that essentially you had all Palestinians being confined to like one building, like one giant skyscraper, where you had like the Palestinians being essentially all residents of one tower. But now, again, you have utopian, dystopian imaginations, but essentially science fiction gives you a possibility to speak about, for instance, Israel and Palestine, and speak about various possibilities, whereas a lot of people feel otherwise they can't really talk about it.
Yeah. Matthias, I guess we're sort of coming to the end, and I'm asking you questions. I mean, your talk was so rich that there's so many different aspects. I'm trying to cover them. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand as I just continue. But let's, as we come to a conclusion here, again, maybe we can kind of return to the question of the UFO. What really interests me personally in my research is the interaction between the sort of social and cultural dimensions of the UFO phenomenon. In other words, the UFO is a cultural artifact that has, some kind of symbolic meaning and can be used, right? Just as it is a cultural artifact, it can be used for all sorts of purposes, right? But then there's this other aspect of the UFO as a description for an empirical phenomenon, right? An experience of something that is either seen at a distance, right, in the sky, or that is something that is encountered at an increasing nearness. So you have then this talk of experiencers, and so we have sort of three elements here, right? We have the UFO phenomenon, and then we have these other two elements that bring us into the realm, the ontological and the theological realm in Quranic thought. The question of other worlds, the question of other beings. So with respect to the experience, right, the UFO phenomenon as an empirical experience, in relation to these other two issues, how do you see that is unfolding in the Islamic world? In other words, is it the case that the UFO phenomenon is brought under existing Quranic concepts and sort of elaborated along Quranic lines? If so, how exactly does that play out? I know you sort of touched on that in your talk. So if we could just kind of return to those themes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Like really, really great points. Yeah. So I think, right, what is really special about sort of UFOs in the Muslim world is maybe that connection with the jinn, right? That sort of a lot of Muslims sort of are trying to make sense of the phenomenon of UFOs, of UAP, through the concept of the jinn, the jinnis. I think they sort of can do so like using a very rich scriptural basis and a very rich literary tradition. So the jinn are in the Quran. There's a chapter named after the jinn in the Quran, which also means if you as a Muslim believe that the Quran is the word of God, and if the Quran talks about the jinn, then you must believe that the jinn really exist, which is different, for instance, from a lot of Christian traditions where, yes, let's say in sort of European Christian traditions, yes, there are demons, there are fairies, but let's say the stories about them don't have quite the same status as sort of word of God, right? As in the Quran. But now the jinn at the same time, right? So you people, Muslims in general, believe that they do exist, and at the same time, right? They're not sort of pure evil demonic creatures either, right? They're very sort of it's not clear whether they're good, whether they're evil, whether there's something in between, right? Like even sort of how the jinn are portrayed in popular culture. If you think about the 1001 Nights, Disney's Aladdin, the genie is a positive character. The genie is a powerful, sort of really, really nice, friendly person. So the jinn have that sort of ambivalence to them, right? Where they're powerful, they can be good, they could be evil. And I think maybe that's also why they can be so productive in connection with UFOs, right? Because aliens, UFOs, right? Sometimes they're seen as being nefarious, right? Aliens invading us, aliens in the Bermuda Triangle, bringing down planes and ships and so on. But of course also, right, you have the idea of the aliens landing and bringing salvation. The ideas of aliens being friendly people like E.T. the Extraterrestrial from Steven Spielberg's film. So I think maybe in the Muslim world, the jinn map so easily on UFOs and aliens because the concept in some ways, in both cases, is so vague, so ambivalent, multivalent, changing, and so on. So I think, like ontologically, maybe that jinn UFO connection is something special when it comes to the Muslim world.
Yeah. So, and that's with respect to the sort of the other beings question, because I guess the implicit assumption here is that the UFO, right, is a manifestation of a form of a phenomenon for which you could attribute, to which you can attribute the activities of these beings, or somehow, right, they're suggestive of or otherwise indicative of these beings. But then there's this question, right, of worlds, from where the UFO derives. So, I mean, whenever I would always talk about the subject, immediately that was always associated with the jinn, right? But my sense, of the Islamic cosmology, talking to my friends, is that the jinn come from the earth in some sense. They're under or in the earth and associated with the earth. So let's talk about this other question of other worlds, and how does that relate to the question of the beings, right? And so that's just a question of the cosmology or ontology of Quranic thinking. And then there's this question how we can relate that then to or how it is in fact related to the UFO phenomenon. So could you puzzle out that for me? Because it seems like, right, in Islam you sort of accept a plurality of worlds, meaning worlds sort of in space, right? Else, not on the earth, elsewhere, but in somewhere I can travel to. And then there's this other question of sort of like maybe the heavenly realms, which is a kind of a dimensional thing, right? I can't necessarily travel to heaven. I have to undertake a kind of a spiritual journey, dying, etc., to get there. So can you sort of puzzle out all of that for us?
Thank you. Yes, so the Quran itself speaks about a plurality of worlds, that there's more than one world, that God is the Lord of all the worlds. However, it is not quite clear what is meant by world, right? And nowadays, right, we understand often worlds as planets. But in some ways, that's a post-Copernican understanding, right? Sort of that Copernicus gave us the idea that, yes, Earth is a planet, and other planets are therefore possibly other Earths, and so on. Now, the Quran as a text is pre-Copernican. The Quran itself was appeared around 600, sort of in a late antique context, right? Sort of in a context where you had Christian thinking, Jewish thinking, Hellenistic thinking, Aristotelian thinking, Platonic thinking, like ancient Greek thinking, and so on. So this is the time period when the Quran sort of emerged, and when you have talking about different worlds. Like in Islamic literature, there is the idea of there being a world of the humans and a world of the jinn. So in some ways they do have different worlds. But does the Quran therefore mean that the jinn have their own planet? It's not quite sure, right? Your friend said there that in some ways the jinn are sort of off the earth or here on earth or so. Sometimes they're described as sort of interdimensional creatures, right? So that maybe the world of the jinn is a different dimension. And in sort of general mainstream Muslim understanding, the jinn are described as being made of fire, whereas we humans are sort of made of earth or made of soil, but the jinn are made of fire. So of a different maybe substance, different matter altogether, which again might suggest that they could be coming from a different dimension. So yeah, that could still make them extraterrestrial, meaning outside of Earth, just being the outside, being a different dimension rather than a planet from a different solar system.
Right. So sort of, it's not clear, right?
Exactly.
There's different, yeah, right. There's different ways one can go with that. And yeah, thank you for pointing out it's sort of the pre-modern, pre-Copernican sort of origins. That's right. Of the Islamic the thinking there. That's a very important point.
I think we have a question. We have a hand raised.
There were two actually, but Raphael, I think you put your hand down. Not sure if you want to ask your question or not. And then there was another person, but I think they logged out, Andre.
Yeah.
So if Raphael, yes. Yeah, there we go. Do you want to ask your question?
So the way I see it, these ancient traditions that we call today religion, I see as an attempt to to make sense of these weird things they were seeing, they were experiencing. That's how I see it today. So and that's, in some way, that's exactly what we're doing right now, but through another lenses, and how to deal with this hidden world that we don't see it, but it looks like it's talking to us somehow. So if you but religion, religion, from the origin of the word is like religare. It means reconnect. So I think, in a sense, that's what they're trying to do, right? They use religion to make sense of this thing, right? Which they had no idea, and now we have more idea. So if you strip away all the religion, all the the dogma part of the ancient texts, how do you make sense of this if you apply a lens of today? For example, the very essence of the Muslim world came from an interaction with a non-human being, right? Muhammad had a revelation for Archangel Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken. So if you see the modern lenses, that's non-human intelligence, right? So how, if you strip away all the religion, how can it make sense? How can you understand these kind of events today?
Yeah, thank you. Those are really good points, right? You mentioned, right, the revelation being itself extraterrestrial. In some ways, God is an extraterrestrial intelligence himself, in that he's a form of intelligence who's clearly outside of our world. Then the Quran, speaking of like 7 heavens, right? And this is an old idea, 7 heavens, 7 earths, and then in those heavens, you have different creatures. You mentioned, right, Angel Gabriel. To what extent is Gabriel an extraterrestrial? The angels, right, would be those creatures who are in the heavens, but who can come to earth. There is some debate, right, to what extent the angels are merely tools of God, or to what extent the angels are also like intelligent beings in themselves. There is some debate about Satan, for instance, right? Whether Satan was a fallen angel, or another kind of creature altogether. If he was a fallen angel, right, then this indeed suggested, yes, angels are intelligent, that they can make choices, that just like humans, angels can either choose to go with God or go against God, and then become fallen, just like humans can become fallen, and so on. So in some ways, right, in the Islamic tradition, it's not just the jinn who are potentially extraterrestrials, but also the angels too. And you mentioned what happens if we strip away all of that religion.
Yeah, meaning, okay, we take it seriously, but not literally. How, if you strip away all the religion, but taking seriously what it's saying, what does it tell us? I mean, how can you make sense of this through our lenses today? That's my question.
Like of the UFO phenomenon, if we remove all of religion.
Yes. So how can it make sense of this? I mean, we're taking them seriously. We are saying they're telling the truth. That's what they saw. That's what they interact with. So if you strip away all the religion part, all the the dogmas and the laws that come after it, if you look at the way of the science today, how can it make sense of this? I really have a hard time, reconciliating those two views.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we remove everything religious there, right, and if we have these sightings, right, of UAP, like over Islamic countries, right, sort of what could they be, right? Right, and in some cases, right, we do have evidence. Yes, this was a Russian booster rocket that sort of burned off in the atmosphere. Right, there are probably many other things, right, sort of phenomena in the atmosphere that are sort of that we can explain sort of without sort of any religion itself, right? In around the world, right, we see ever more activity in sort of the atmosphere and space, right? We have more and more satellites, we have more and more drones as well. And what you have in a lot of places in the Muslim world, right, is a lot of discrepancy between sometimes like low tech on the ground and high tech above. So for instance, if you look at like certain valleys of Afghanistan or Pakistan, right, where you would have very, very poor people but with very limited education looking up to the sky, and then they see American drones, for instance, used as part of a war on terror, sort of spying on sort of different Afghan peasants. Sometimes these drones sort of coming, appearing without warning, without noise, and so on. Then, I could imagine, right, a lot of, let's say, Afghan villagers, they might look at these strange objects in the sky and sort of maybe sort of realize, yes, that's what they are. They are sort of American drones here to kill Al-Qaeda terrorists or so. So they understand them completely without any sort of religion. But sort of if they don't necessarily have the technical understanding of how these drones work, maybe they have their own sort of imaginations as well. Would be a fascinating topic for anthropologists to study, actually, like how do ordinary people in often rural areas, do they make sense of like all the drones, airplanes, rockets, missiles, satellites, all the busy things that are happening above their heads?
I think there's, though, if I could elaborate on what Raphael is sort of pointing to, there's a more radical claim, right? Which is that whatever the UFO phenomenon is, it must be trans-historical, it must be trans-cultural, and therefore it's possible to look at religious experiences from the point of view of what we call the UFO phenomenon. So while there's the safe thesis that says that, okay, there's something called God, and then he has angels, and then there are these things in Islam, we call them jinn. And we might try to associate some subset of that with the UFO phenomenon, but the more radical thesis is that everything that we call religious, from from these incredible encounters with the being that we call God, to the jinn, to the angels, that the entire range of that is somehow connected to whatever it is, right? That is the origin of at least some class of UFO or UAP phenomenon. That's kind of like the more radical thesis, which is trying to say that whatever the UFO or UAP phenomenon is, that it is in fact the source of religion, actually. And I think that's perhaps the more radical thesis. Do you want to sort of comment on that sort of aspect?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this, whatever it is, sort of those being the source of religion, right? But in some ways, right, it also reminds me of the Swiss author Erich von Däniken's thesis, right, about the ancient astronauts. And of course, Erich von Däniken, he traveled around the world. Sort of, he was making good use of like the Swiss hard currency that sort of he was earning, I think, by think owning a hotel also, and to travel, and sort of he came up with the idea that sort of sort of all these sort of ancient gods that sort of are being depicted around the world may have been in fact sort of aliens. So in some ways, sort of the aliens being the source of religion in the first place. And Erich von Däniken, he often talks about the Middle East, right, because there are so many ancient monuments there. So he talks about sort of ancient Egypt. He talks about temples in ancient Lebanon, Baalbek, for instance, like talks about temples where sort of he also like doubts whether humans could have actually built them. And I guess, I don't know, with like some people might find Erich von Däniken here sort of condescending and saying, well, sort of he sort of was doubting that ancient Egyptians could have actually built the pyramids. It must have been aliens, that kind of thing. But actually, you had a lot of people in Egypt and other countries who were actually intrigued by these writings and sort of wrote their own books about sort of ancient astronauts and sort of origins of religion that in some ways are connected to perhaps alien visitors.
Brian?
Yes, just to body check that last topic, use a Canadian metaphor. I took a quick look at the chapter on the jinn in the Quran here. It's very short. Obviously, the jinn precede the composition of the Quran. They're part of the folklore, I guess, of the Arabic culture at the time. Right. There's a new book out from University of Chicago Press called Diamonds Are Forever, which focuses on the dissemination of this idea of sort of like creatures between God and man, right? The sort of the jinn-like creature included. It's a wonderful overarching anthropological, ethnological approach. But I guess my question is, look, what, and this is a vast field, which I don't expect you to answer right away or in totality at all, but surely folklorists, ethnologists, anthropologists have something to say about the jinn, right? What is that? Because that is ultimately what the jinn are at a certain level, right? We don't have to think that the noun jinn refers to an entity in the world. The noun jinn is a sign, if you will, in various discourses, mainly the folklore, the traditions of the Arabic world. What is their function, or what are various takes on their function in the folklore of the Arabic world, to your knowledge?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So you're right that yeah, in some ways they are, the jinn are like the daimons, the demons, but they are like the fairies, but they are like fulfill sort of this, maybe the same function as supernatural beings sort of anywhere around the world, right? As sort of the dragons, as so in that sense, right, they fulfill like a literary function, right? And in some ways, science fiction, right, is also like a continuation of like speculative writing, of fantastical writing, and some storytelling that has always existed. So on some very basic level, right, maybe the UFOs are like the dragons from ancient and medieval literature. So yeah, you're raise a very good point that the jinn, right, predate the Quran itself, that they're part of like the folklore of the cosmology of that time. So yeah, fascinating questions here. So I would say that the the jinn, right? They don't just fulfill one function here, because just like with a lot of creatures from folklore, they don't necessarily have one author only, right? So there are many different stories about the jinn, just like there are many different stories about fairies. And in some stories, fairies are good creatures, and some of them they're evil creatures, and some of them there's something in between. So in some ways, jinn are just like people, sort of like very diverse. Can be good, can be bad, and so on. And sort of maybe jinn, on some basic level, just provide a mirror image of humanity, a mirror of people, just like UFOs in some ways, right? And aliens can be a mirror of our fears and hopes of aliens bringing destruction, aliens bringing salvation, alien representing the best or the worst that we can imagine in humanity.
Just one quick follow-up. It's often said that Homer and Hesiod gave the Greeks their gods. Do we know who gave the Arabic culture their jinn?
That's a really good question. So I think there are different theories about like where maybe the word originates from. Some people have made the connection between the Latin word genius and the Arabic word jinn. But it is hard to say, because there's very little written evidence of sort of Arabic before the Quran. So yeah, it's very hard to prove, for instance, a connection between Latin genius or genius and Arabic jinn.
Well, more research to do. Good.
Absolutely, much more research to do.
Good. Thanks again.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, Matthias, thank you so much. I think, I mean, obviously we can continue late into the night for us here, but thank you so much. I mean, this has been quite an amazing journey. The form of your presentation was very beautiful. I really like zooming in and out. It was really beautiful to watch that, and the content was absolutely rich and amazing. Lots to think about. I'd love to see more of this kind of a deep dive understanding of Islamic thought and culture with respect to science fiction and how it intersects with the question of the UFO phenomenon, both ontologically and culturally and socially. So thank you very much, Matthias. And thanks everybody for joining the Society. Please check out our newsletter. We have a lot going on at the Society, a lot of events and colloquia, hopefully one every month. We're trying to have. We have our upcoming conference as well in December. Everybody's invited to check that out. We'll be announcing in later this month about that. But thank you again, Matthias. And with that, I would like to bring the colloquium for October to a conclusion. So everyone have a wonderful evening. Schönen Abend. Good night. Ma'salama. And we'll see you next time, maybe next month, hopefully, with another colloquium here. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you for your great questions. Yeah. It was really wonderful. Great comments. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Okay.